So it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you all, especially Bob Stavig, to this webinar on retaining women in engineering, which will be quite exciting. Bob has an extensive experience in both manufacturing and project development and using lean product development tools and methods for more than 16 years. And he decided to write a book with his daughter and some more on this very interesting and important topic. So please, Bob, the stage is yours.
Great. Well, thank you. We had excellent sign up to this. So two things. The first is the event is sponsored by the LPPDE, that's Lean Product and Process Development Exchange. And I do want to note that we've got a North America conference in October in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And we'll see how this area goes, but we may end up putting together like a half-day workshop on this topic, but that's coming up for discussion. So I guess what I'd suggest is if there's questions that come up during, maybe you can put those in the chat and Peter can kind of monitor those and jot down some, because I'm trying to allow about 15 minutes at the end for discussion, but we will end on time. And please feel free to leave if you have a conflict that comes up. Okay, so I want to start with this graph. I will get to kind of the administrative stuff of what we're going to talk about and brief bio about myself and my daughter. But is probably this graph that was the premise for the book. It starts with the fact that after decades of work, women make up 15% of engineers, and pretty slow progress, about 1% per decade. And so you can extrapolate that out, and basically it says we're on a path to achieve gender parity in 350 years. When we compare that against MDs, currently make up 35% of, or women make up 35% of positions, med schools at 50% women. It's a very different situation that's going on, hence the desire to pull Alyssa into this effort. And so just to give some comparisons, and you can just Google this, it's so easy to find. Pharmacists were achieved gender parity 20 years ago, lawyers about now, MDs in 20 years, dentists in 20 years, US Congress in 35 years, and then Fortune 500 CEOs in about 100. So clearly there's work that needs to be done. Sorry about that. So the second piece of this is the Society of Women Engineers. They do a literature review every year. It's 8 pages inside their 100-page magazine that they put together. I pulled these quotes out. They're in the book from the 2020 literature. And I'll just read it because I think they're important. The previous suite reviews of the literature of women in engineering have revealed that there is no consensus as to how to explain the low number of women in engineering. Frustrating reality that progress towards gender equity has slowed. This year's review is no different. Then later in that paragraph, that section, they write, finally, given the persistent lack of diversity in technical fields, we suggest that there are both unexplored and underexplored areas for future research and intervention. And hence, this book and the work that Alyssa and I approached as is that unexplored area. So here's what I'd like to go through in about maybe 40 minutes, do my best to manage the time. The first is the gender schema that contributes. And gender schema is broader than stereotype. Gender schema actually, it includes facts. such as men on average are taller than women. That's a fact, but not all men are taller. The second area is to look at the challenges created by traditional product development. And when I speak about product development, I'm using the most general sense. Anything created new, I would consider as development. Then the third is lean development, the 6 principles that help level. And I realize this is a huge leap to make. And within the book, it takes about 3 chapters to get. But in 40 minutes, we're just going to go through, hopefully, as clean as a thought process as we can. And then I want to leave about 15 minutes for questions and leave to get ready for another meeting. So the current engineering focus relative to gaining women in engineering is pretty simple in terms of climate, big focus on bias, which clearly is there, promotional opportunities, leadership opportunity, mentors, role models, sponsors. Those are all historically being worked on, and they are contributing to at least stabilizing the work. Okay, so I'm a believer in talking about what do we hope to get out of before we talk about it. So the first, we'll go through each of these, is understand the potential negative impact of relational work for women in engineering. And for anyone that has been paying attention to what the pandemic did, is there's continual arguments or research and articles relative to basically women having to pick up the slack in terms of trying to stabilize the new working that the pandemic. Second is to understand how the method of engineering is done and how it creates an unlevel playing field. Third is how these might be brought into the workplace. And then the fourth is to about how you might bring this into a SWE chapter or a university engineering program. Basically educate women going into this field, understand the playing field. And then the last is consider mentoring female engineers in these. So brief bio, Alyssa is a bachelor's in physics and anthropology, MD from Duke Medical School. She did a 5-year residency at Duke Hospital, combined internal medicine and psychiatry, and she's currently an MD working in Billings, Montana. And from my perspective, she was the perfect MD to contribute to this. I have 20 years of product development experience, 16 years of user development, 15 years of manufacturing experience, and a bachelor's in mechanical engineering. Okay, so let's start with kind of the foundation of the population that we hope to attract engineering. First, there is no difference in capability. Whatever subtle differences some study might find, they wouldn't even remotely explain the dramatic difference that we have. And any of those differences are usually explained by just lack of or being exposed to it. The second piece is that only 3% of 18-year-olds will become engineers. That's a pretty small number. And so although we can talk about the averages, it really doesn't matter. It's talking about the tail of the district. And so when we think about attracting and achieving that gender parity, that is that 3% really working to understand and create an environment that would attract them to this field. Okay, let's talk about the gender schema that creates this. This is a diagram that's out of the book. And so we devote about the first 3 chapters to trying to formulate where the challenge begins. And so this gender schema starts at birth, and we're going to suggest it goes up to high school contact. And it's basically the difference between how we treat boys and girls, the expectations we have on them. And anybody can see this by walking into a toy store, any of those things that occur, and they start as early as 4 and 5 year olds. By the time you get that age, boys and girls already understand what's expected of them, how they should behave, and they might think of their capabilities. By 3rd grade, you've set the stage that boys are expected to be strong in math and girls not so much. And so all this is speaking to the average. It's not speaking to the tails of the distribution, but those averages create that mindset. And so there's obviously lots of work being done trying to address that. Growth mindset is a great example. My daughter, an elementary teacher, got that into her classroom. But in general, it's very hard for parents to overcome much as we need. When we get into an engineering program, things tend to level out. They're mostly equal. They are not equal by any sense, but they are mostly equal. And that's because everybody has taken the same set of classes. Everybody is taking the same tests. They've got generally the same exposure to information. Now, how they are treated in the classroom can have a significant, how they're treated outside the classroom, team projects, all of that stuff. But a significant portion of their experience has been effectively leveled. Maybe that's 80%. And that's effectively why I read a great book from, and she said she had never seen bias until she got into the workplace. She didn't see it growing up, and she didn't see it. However, when you get into the working world, an engineer's first job, that's where we start seeing all of the biases and expectations that led up to high school come around into the work world. And these are the implicit biases. These are the biases that we don't even know we have. And they unfortunately create situations that move us from one perspective to another based upon someone's gender. And so one of the areas that I always thought about, but I didn't realize how much, how prevalent it was and how much research is out there, was this technical versus relational roles. And there's a great book out there, Disappearing Acts, Gender Power. It was written in 1990. It's like 140 pages. It's one of those books that it's a cover to cover type of book. And it, as I remember, it basically looks at the experiences that maybe half a dozen women have had, how they feel that they are encouraged to move into relational roles, or things that take care of the group over being technical. They make sure that the activities are being coordinated, and most importantly, they're not expected to necessarily. And what begins to happen is that, and it can start even in the first year, is that every week that kind of goes by, every month that kind of goes by, they're continually building this relational expectation. This is what I brought up earlier. COVID really contributed to that. And whereas men are expected to be technical, and they're encouraged to be technical. And the relational roles, at least in many corporations, begins with first level managers. If the organization doesn't expect first level managers to be technical, and are more dedicated towards relational, it creates that difference that goes on. There's many efforts out there to get management teams to be 50%, but it's not clear to me that it's necessarily going to address the engineering problem. And that's an area that needs study. Okay, so now we're going to jump to the way the work is done. And so just going to take a very simplistic view of traditional product. And there's a fair amount of research out there, but I've basically characterized it as the first is a separation of technical. And that is done in part because in many organizations, there's a melding of wanting to have technical and business, right? But the organizational structure just doesn't fit, but it naturally happens. So it may result in a major program being, quote, 2 in a box is a common. It also may result in that the business side of it is actually driving, and the technical side is just trying to keep up. The second is a very specific way of creating something new called build, test, fit. I'll talk about that in a second. The third is this phase gate, which is an approach where a significant amount of work is done, and then there's some milestone to say, okay, everything looks good, let's go. Then the fourth is an approach of just get it done. I've given you the people, you have the dollars, resources, know what the objective is, please just get it. And so what this, getting back to this build, test, fix, which is a major way that most engineering is done, and third graders are taught this approach as an example. It's a very common way of thinking about solving a problem. Is it starts with knowledge and confidence, is where bias can, and the cloud thing is intended to show that it's pretty fluid, but it results in the best idea. You build, test, and then fix it. And this is where bias can also occur. I mean, the knowledge and confidence that separates people, the loudest voice, creating the best idea, and then build, test, fixing yourself to a solution. So we can, when we think about the implicit biases that occur, like he's very vocal, very aggressive. He raises good ideas. It's a difference that just naturally has already been created and creates essentially a level playing field. If you do look at the book, the foreword which Stavig wrote, gives that same example for his daughter in school. And so what I would suggest is that this development approach, foundation of how the work gets done in engineering, is in addition to creating an unlevel playing field, is unstructured. There's not enough structure like school to know that, yes, we gathered the rest the best knowledge. We've ignored the level of confidence that someone has in it. They've just expressed the facts. And that's a level of structure that helps the organization. So now let's jump to the second piece. This is access to learning or knowledge. And this is where we're trying to take the learnings we understand relative to the way product engineering and then compare it to, okay, where is medicine at? How have they achieved it? How are they getting to gender parity? And so this was actually the second part of the premise of the how to approach the problem. Is I text Alyssa and I said, what level of your learning comes from web-based knowledge? And she texts back, and eventually we arrived at about 70%. So about 70% of what she needs to know in order to do her job, she just gets it from the web. She has control over it. And then you take the remaining 30%, and she would suggest that about half of that comes from the patient, and then half of it comes from her supervisor. And so as an individual sitting down with a physician, that seems like a pretty good. When I've asked engineers across numerous industries I've interviewed, I will get a response. Web-based knowledge is an area of 20%. And some will literally say almost zero. Now, there are areas of engineering where that is not the case. Nuclear engineering would be one of those. It's highly regulated, enormous amount of knowledge. When you get into the area of product development, a small number, percentage. Then you make the split. Okay, well, where's the other 80% come from? And we could just split it, suggest that trial and error is 40% of it, and from others is 40%. So I was talking to a woman in a very male-dominated industry, heavy industry kind of environment. It was one of the only female in a group of women, or 40 men. And I asked her, well, where do you get your knowledge? I mean, to do your work? Because I just walk around and talk. Okay. And she was agreeing with this 20%. So we've got basically two pieces that we've worked through. One is how the work is done. And then the second is this access to knowledge. This is a slice of the problem. There are other areas that have to, just for this 40 minutes, we make this huge leap, lean development. And it is intended to try and isolate the areas of the work and focus on the way the work is done, as opposed to how people treat it. Okay? The aspect of how people treat each other is critical, and that is essentially what has stabilized the work environment. But this area of lean development, which we'll get to the specifics of, is focused at driving better business results. That's why it's been working for 20 years. That's its sole purpose. As I was talking to, as Alyssa and I were working through this, her access to knowledge at 70%, and there are actually laws in place prior to sharing the knowledge for physicians, had nothing to do with enabling a positive work. It wasn't even on the table. It just didn't even come into mind. It was to create better physicians. That was its sole purpose. And as we've seen in that first graph, the women benefited. Then the second piece is it levels the playing field. Access to an equal amount of knowledge and how the work is. And so in terms of just what this is, those that are new to Lean, a number of people that are probably well versed in, Lean is the elimination of waste. And within development, waste is anything that slows down learning and decisions. And so this aspect of how you learn is critical. And we stress pretty heavily that it is our learning rate that basically defines our success. If it takes you a year to learn something versus 6, however you are approaching that work, there's a dramatic difference. See that clearly when anyone talks about innovation. The second piece is that this is research out of the 80s. It has shown that lean development is for the market. Toyota is the best. Again, none of this work was ever envisioned to level the playing field for anyone. It was all done in the 80s to effectively help the US automotive industry be more competitive. That's where the energy and focus was. And of course, it's progressed into everywhere. There's an enormous amount of research done to basically validate it. So, okay, so I want to start through is these two components, value-added structure, how the work is done. And I use the word value add to make, not talking about just structure for structure. Value adds benefits, and then access to knowledge. This creates the lack of those creates an unlevel playing field for women. So we make this huge leap to the principles of, and these come out of work by a number of different individuals. Alan Ward, at least as I've been able to find, kind of had the first consolidated. So these are 20 years old. It's all, as I mentioned, out of research from Toyota. There's 6 that I've identified here. And this creation of reusable knowledge is foundational. Cadence, pull, and flow is a classic lean methodology. Visual management, you can't manage what you can't see. We know that just by writing stuff down. Entrepreneurial system designer, which is sometimes called a chief engineer. Set-based design versus build test. And the last is build teams are responsible. I would suggest these 6 principles are no different than if you took a heat transfer. And here's some principles to think. The thermodynamics, any of those engineering courses have principles that are basically, they drive how you approach it. The second piece is that none of these are expected to be done if they don't help. And so the creation of reusable knowledge is intended to help. You're working towards building teams responsible experts. Come up with at least paragraphs, not pages, but paragraphs that might describe how to approach each of these principles, such that you would be able to Organizationally, give yourself a letter grade. So if you believe reusable knowledge, which we'll talk about in a second, is good, then you could give yourself a letter grade through F of how well does my organization do that. And so when we go to this next piece, we're going to focus on these two areas, usable knowledge and set-based design. So I've got positive feedback from individuals suggests that, well, at least what is being communicated in this is very specific, very actionable, and then we can debate it. I believe is this. We're going to start with the reusable knowledge. This is the knowledge that is being written down during the learning. Okay? It is not done after the fact. And we'll talk about how that in a second. It is not extra work. You're doing it because you believe and understanding that it moves the organization forward. So although I don't believe that it's to do, certainly someone writing down meeting minute notes, sending those down are an example. It's written down, it's sent out, it just to help the organization. We have at least a common understanding of that. The second is it's focused on clarity and conciseness. Can all experience a paragraph of text that clearly could have been one sentence. Right? Some people do that because they want to make sure the whole picture is shown, but this clarity and conciseness. This reusable knowledge, it's findable by others. And so the example of a new to career female engineer needing a piece of information in order to do her work, finding a person that has it, and then that person giving it to her is not an example of finding it by others. Alyssa never had to ask one of her peers to find anything. She was taught how to do that. Most importantly, the organization designed to enable it. And secondly, and then we can look at the knowledge and we can expect that it has both scope and depth. In other words, it's broad enough to put it in context, deep enough to give it value. And finally, it's technical or business. And we can all find examples in our personal experiences where some communication is neither technical nor business. It appears just to be fluff. The kind of the last piece in this reusable knowledge is a very specific method, A3 problem solving. So, about half the people that I talk to that are aware of this have problems with the method. Maybe a portion of them see it of value. It's very specific. I'm not going to go into it now, but you can Google it. It's one of those tools that came out of Toyota in the 80s. And there's half a dozen very good on the topic. Google it, YouTube videos, all kinds. And we put it within the context of changing the way the work. So it is, and an important approach.
Bob, can you say that again? Sorry,
yes.
You said you put it in the context of what? Your voice went out.
Oh, pivotable.
Oh.
It is a central point of changing the way the work is done. That's excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, just FYI, your voice is going out a fraction of the time. I can get most of what you're saying, but some of it's popping out.
Okay, sorry about that. So then thank you. So then the second piece is this set-based design. Okay. And so this is the opposite of build, test, fit. This is identifying multiple options and ideas, establishing knowledge gaps for each, fast learning to eliminate the weakness, to the learning that is gained, move the learning forward to stronger options, and end up with the stronger. So it is just fundamentally the opposite of how most of that work is done. I consider build, test, fix is like playing chess. Step-based design is like, it's a much more complicated approach, but it fundamentally changes how the work is done. These two pieces that promote both technical excellence and level the playing field at the same time. And it's that promotion of technical excellence that is core. This is essentially how you can address the relational. Women might feel drawn to, encouraged to, pushed to, whatever direction is going on. It's real. Every woman that I've talked to sees it. And so it's something that needs to be understood. Okay, so now we get back to the end. And so the idea out of this hour is one, understanding the relational work. What many engineers, female engineers, when you read the research, read the interviews, is there's a great quote that said, I didn't become an engineer to take care of people. I want technical work. The second piece is understanding how the work is done. Method of engineering. That's within our control to change that. We can't control the bias, implicit bias that exists, but we can control how the engineering is done. When we let that occur and be driven from driving better business results, everybody benefits. And then the third, which I think is important, is we need to move this upstream into the attraction of women into engineering through SWE chapters or an engineering, a university engineering program. And I've got on this website that some of you might have seen, I've got a page specifically devoted to promoting change. Okay, so we're back to this graph. What we are doing is currently important. I don't want to take away any of that. All the efforts that have gone in to date help with that. It has basically stabilized the work environment. And so when we talk about bias, explicit bias, for the most part, a lot of that has been significantly reduced. Maybe in progressive organizations, eliminated. You could never point to anything that was explicit bias. It's the implicit bias, which is where a lot of the work is at. Organizations like Lean In, great book that was written a couple of years ago on that. It's this implicit bias that is just in our minds. We just look at people and we feel more comfortable when they're like us. And so therefore we gravitate towards them and we encourage them to gravitate towards us. And there's a number of different areas where implicit bias comes in, just what we expect. And we can see it in how we might interact with even our own children. The second piece is understand the differences in the two professions, what we can learn. MDs and engineers are not the same, but they have similarities that we need to understand. And I would suggest as time goes on, MDs are becoming more and more like engineers. Not like 100 years ago, but they are learning more about technology and they're basically kind of gravitating towards that. But the most important thing is the slope of their line is just growing. And I was looking at this just a couple days ago, and although it would take some additional research, I don't believe any of this growth in MDs has increased because there's more women in the field, because then it would be naturally going up at a steeper rate. It's basically just a common process that they have. The design of their system to create MDs is delivering that growth. And then the last is think about how we do the work, how the day-to-day job is done, what we're asked to do, what's expected of us, and how that affects the progress. So I finished up the content. I hope it was clear enough what I was speaking. I think the slides hopefully communicated the intent. And I would like to get 15 minutes or so, would like to open it up for any questions that maybe Peter or others have seen in the chat. I haven't been looking at it at all, so I have no idea. I just see that there's so maybe if someone has a specific question, I can go back to the slide. Thoughts?
So, Bob, I'm wondering if you could go back to the slide where you present writing things down and then also the chess versus checkers analogy, just so I can absorb it a little more.
Yes. Is there anything specific to it?
So, if I understand what you're saying, you're saying that in the medical industry, MDs have access to reusable knowledge very easily, and that this inadvertently helped more women succeed in being an MD or wanting to become an MD. Is that sort of my understanding that correctly? Okay. And then I think the thing I struggle with is set-based design versus build, test, fix. I think I'm not fully catching on to that.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, so the reusable knowledge, and so Alyssa was the first MD in, going to school, starting for my wife. We didn't know anything about being an MD. We joked with her when she started thinking about the only thing we know about becoming an MD is watching Grey's Anatomy, for anybody out there. Okay, that was it. But you can picture on the reusable knowledge side, the example where 3 or 4 or 5 of them are standing around a patient and the doctor asks a question and one of the residents gives an answer about what the diagnosis, they know that, and it builds confidence. So it's that kind of thing that basically solidifies how you, the benefit that you see from that, okay? Everybody knows the same information or has access to the same information, okay? On the set-based versus build, test, fix, this is a very specific thing. It is not taught in universities that I'm aware of relative to mechanical or electrical. It's not overly complex, but it's one of those things that it would take about an hour to really kind of go through it and give a foundation. But it starts this build, test, fix, which you'll Google it. I did noted in the book. Just Google design methods for elementary student posters. You'll see it. And so what it is, you picture 3 or 4 people talking about how to solve a problem. And they start throwing out ideas. Do this, do this, do this. And eventually they arrive as a group, however it occurs, to, okay, this is a good idea. Let's make that work. That's the build test fit. Okay. And it is inherently driven off of who might have the loudest voice, who has the experience with that, and who has the most confidence. The individuals that are less than that don't have access to the knowledge, they are basically following along with the group. Well, I guess that'll. So in the case of set-based design, it's a case of, okay, let's gather all the options. We've got 5 of them, let's say. We're going to go through and talk about each one of them from what don't we know about that option? What do we need to learn? And you might agree on the list for any of those 5. And then as a group, you might say, well, okay, this one here looks like it's the best idea, but it has the biggest knowledge gap. That's what you attack first. Okay. And you might conclude that, yes, it's the best idea. It has the biggest knowledge gap. Once we learn what we need to know, it's not going to work. That is the approach of basically eliminating the weakest solution. And what you do when it's managed well, all this stuff is expected to be managed well, is the entire group is working together towards that. Okay. Did that help?
Right. So it's more of a how you come up with how you're going to tackle a solution or develop a product.
Yes.
It's not, you're not proposing that. You're not proposing that set-based design is better for women? Are you saying set-based design is, okay, you're naming like 5 ways to get something done.
Better for everyone.
Okay.
Yeah. Set-based design is better for everyone. Women just happen to benefit. Same as medicine. Yeah. The whole, this is basically driving better business results. Is there another question? We have about 10 minutes, maybe.
I made some writing on set-based in the chat. Just to add to what you
explained. Yeah, so for people that, yeah. Okay.
I have a question. What analysis have you made about the gender equality in USA as a general aspect? You showed in the beginning, Bob, that there were gender equality in some areas, and in some others it will be that within 20 years, but in engineering it will take, as it looks like now, 350 years. But the society then, what impact does that have?
So I think in general, so engineering is actually the largest profession, single profession. So like I said, 150, 140 engineers are created every year, whereas only, I think, 20 or 30,000 doctors, 20 or 30,000 lawyers. So engineering is a big component to gender equity at a professional level. Now, I'm not talking about a small number. And so that drives access to wealth. It certainly drives contributing to innovation. It drives an enormous amount of stuff, which is why the US government and other companies are spending billions of dollars trying to enable this quote gender equity. But within engineering, there are a number of disciplines that are already at 50%. So environmental engineering is 50% women. Right? But when you get down to mechanical engineering, it's like 12%, and yet it's the biggest number. So from a society standpoint, I think it's important, which is hence the reason to look at it.
Yeah.
And I apologize, I will need to work on a microphone solution. Either that or my internet. Is there another area of question?
I could just add a data point, and being from Sweden and being Sweden, I looked on the statistics in Sweden, and if we look on civil engineering, Master of Science degree education in Sweden, there were 28% of the graduates 10 years ago, or 2009 to 2010, were women. And that increased to 35% in 2019 to 2020. So following more the MD curve that you showed then in Sweden. And out of 18 specializations then at the university, then there were only 3 that were on equal level 10 years ago or 13 years ago. 3 years ago, it was 6. So there are more and more women than that are taking higher or are graduating from the engineering educations in Sweden.
Hi, this is Rose. I just had a comment on what you were saying with the graduates in engineering in Sweden, because one of the issues with retaining women in engineering is that you see a lot of women graduating, but you don't see them staying in the field long term because of their experiences in the workplace. And I was just wondering if in Sweden, what the, postgraduate working world numbers look like in terms of the number of women that are choosing to stay in engineering versus leaving engineering once they're in the work field.
Yeah, that's a great question that I need to dig a little bit deeper into, but I think it's just my feeling is that more women are staying in engineering than what you have seen then, but I don't have data for that. But it's a relevant issue and question, absolutely.
And I think my experience of the same is very much towards what Bob presented, that we have more tasks on relationship based, and where the women get their development. It's a bit more a struggle to get the technical expertise to really dig into being technical experts. But we have that in focus to improve, of course, but that's the tendency.
Yes. Well, I think about 5 minutes from being done. I do appreciate people participating in this. And for those that are still on, and I'll get an email out to the people that signed up, and I'll get a list from Peter to the people that were able to attend, and offer up that whoever wants to talk about this, I'm more than open to it. I've been clear, a little tagline: I'm not a consultant, I'm not a coach, I'm just a guy who wrote a book. And I will help whoever would like to learn more about it, and more specifically, actually, working on a specific area of change. So,
Bob, there's another question for you in the chat.
Yeah.
A real good question, Bob. We want to hear it.
Yeah. beyond your daughter, what made you take up this focus work, Bob?
Probably not to share. See, how do I say this? For a number of years, maybe 20, working for Hewlett-Packard, who is very progressive, one of the most progressive companies out there, I was expected, and I clearly supported the need to attract women, retain them within engineering. However, when you look at the numbers, it wasn't working the way that anybody would have wanted. And it would always have been better. And so, and I've talked to my brothers in the same kind of role. And so it really just became, here's a problem. I'm an engineer. Maybe I can help solve it. And then, of course, having access to my daughter and seeing her success was the reason for the book and the effort. So I am retired. I'm not looking for another job. So, okay.
Retired, but still learning and curious.
Yes. Oh, yeah. And I will offer up, I buy a book a week. Amazon is my friend. So if I see something that has a good area of focus, like just buy the book and just start skimming through it. None of this Kindle stuff. I don't have a single Kindle. So, okay. Okay. Well, great.
Bob,
go ahead.
Did you interview women who stayed at HP and interview them about their experiences and why they stayed, or was it mostly limited to your daughter and the MD analogy?
Oh no, I interviewed a number of women, both inside of HP and outside. In fact, mostly outside. I would come along. And then both Deb and Rose, who were on the call, Rose still, they wrote a chapter on role models and mentor, and they interviewed a whole bunch of women. And so from my discussion with them in terms of some sense was the other vehicle. There was I'll be honest, I don't think that you need to interview more than half a dozen women that have looked at it. You ask the right questions and you've got a good feel for the situation. Doesn't take a huge population.
Right.
Okay. So
great. I think then we can wrap up this because we will distribute the presentation and the recording afterwards, also to all the people who have signed up. And as Bob said, he is open for continuous discussion. So thank you, Bob, for a nice presentation on this important topic.
great.
So thank you, and good night or good day.
Yep. Thank you very much.